Right, let's get into this. Welcome to episode 1 of our Okoye Family Explainer series. Today, we are peeling right back past that glossy billionaire pop star facade of P-Square to uncover a much grittier origin story. We're heading back to the dusty streets of early 2000s Jost to look at the hidden grassroots genesis of the P-Square empire. You know, for over a decade, identical twins Peter and Paul Okoye absolutely dominated the charts across Africa with those infectious hits and that signature choreography. But behind this multi-billion naira empire lies a pretty intense saga of contractual warfare, deep family factures, and a totally forgotten architect. So, the very first question we gotta ask is, who really built the foundation of P-Square? If you go by the highly publicized official PR narrative, the credit almost exclusively goes to their manager and elder brother, Jude Okoye. He's always claimed he was the structural architect who brought them to Lagos and made them stars. But when we actually look at the source documents and some recent explosive testimonies, they reveal a completely different narrative. It's a story built on the untold hustle, sweat, and literal pocket money of a collective of siblings who were seemingly erased from the history books altogether.
And that brings us to an absolute bombshell claim. Breaking a decades-long silence from the family's ancestral home, Henry Okoye, who is actually older than both Jude and the twins, has finally stepped forward as the original, forgotten sponsor of their success. He claims that way before the fame, before any of the big corporate sponsorships, he was the one financing their rise from the ground up. And in return for that massive risk, he says he was promised 20% of all their future earnings.
To really grasp how we got here, picture this. It's the late 90s in Jos, Plateau State. The Okoyes were this large Catholic household raised by their mother Josephine, who was a pastor, and their father Paul Moses. At the time, Peter and Paul were just young teenagers at St. Marumba College, basically doing Michael Jackson, Bobby Brown, and MC Hammer mime routines. Fun fact, they even had these failed football dreams alongside future superstar Mikel John Obi. They were incredibly talented and super hungry, just desperately searching for a corporate sponsor to give them a breakthrough, but the doors just kept closing in their faces.
Well, that breakthrough finally came, but it wasn't some solo genius move. It was a total grassroots, all-hands-on-deck family collective. The forgotten Okoye crew stepped up big time. When corporate sponsors kept saying no, Henry actually used his own beat-up car to distribute flyers across different states. He acted as their personal bodyguard. He literally drove the twins himself to the stadium for the Benson and Hedges talent hunt, the very competition that ultimately launched their career. Meanwhile, you had their sister Lillian handling the money at the door, collecting gate fees for local gigs in Abuja and Jos. And their brother Tony? He wasn't just watching, he was an active backup dancer and choreographer for the group.
So, to secure Henry's continuous financial sponsorship and all that heavy lifting, Peter and Paul made a binding verbal agreement with him. They promised him a 20% share of all future music royalties. This right here was the foundational contract of P-Square. But, as we see time and time again in the music business, unwritten contracts forged in the desperation of poverty rarely survive the corrupting influence of massive, sudden wealth.
Henry's early efforts definitely paid off, and fast. In 2001, they won that Benson and Hedges Grab the Mic competition. By 2003, they dropped their debut album, Last Night. But here is an absolutely critical fact you need to know. Their manager at this point wasn't Jude. It was actually a seasoned concert promoter named Bayo Odusami, popularly known as Howie T. Under Howie T's management, they won major awards. But then, 2004 rolls around. This is the turning point. Jude Okoye steps into the picture, actively seeking to displace that external management so he can assume total, centralized administrative control over his younger brother's booming careers.
Now, you might assume the family was thrilled to keep it in-house, right? Actually, no. According to family testimonies, this transition was fiercely contested. Their late mother, Josephine Okoye, had this dark premonition about the whole thing. She fought hard against Jude taking over as manager, citing some very deep-seated reservations about his personal character and his potential to divide the family. It was this incredibly intense family drama. The only reason Jude was finally allowed to take over was because Tony, the brother who was their backup dancer, tragically begged his mother to yield, just hoping to keep the business and the wealth securely within the family.
And this structural shift, it literally changed everything. During the early era under Howie T, the operational philosophy was professional and integrated. Henry, Lillian, and Tony were heavily involved in all the logistics and performances, and the accounting was handled transparently by third parties. Contrast that with the Jude era from 2004 onwards. It instantly becomes a highly centralized corporate monopoly. The other siblings are systematically excluded and pushed out of the inner circle. Financial transparency just vanishes, completely replaced by an opaque administration where Jude operated as the sole account signatory for several years.
Which leads us right back to that broken promise. For 3 to 4 years, as P-Square exploded into global superstars, releasing mega hits and securing incredibly lucrative endorsements, Henry just waited. After years of unpaid dues, he finally pulled his brothers aside to confront them about that 20% royalty share they had promised him. Just imagine the scene. You have a brother who funded the dream from the mud, standing in a room with his newly wealthy siblings, demanding the honor of a blood-bound verbal contract.
But before Peter or Paul could even fully respond or resolve it, Jude intercepted, and he delivered this cold, brutal dismissal. According to Henry, Jude just looked at him and said, "What do you mean 20%? For what? They're the ones flying to different countries, and if their plane ever crashed, you'd just be sitting comfortably at home." In that single devastating moment, the original family agreement was officially shattered. Henry's crucial early contributions were basically erased on the spot, and he was sidelined from the very empire he helped build.
Now, the bitter irony of this dismissal is just staggering. While Jude mocked Henry's claim to a 20% share, Jude himself quietly secured a massive 40% controlling share of P-Square's corporate vehicle, Northside Entertainment. Peter and Paul, the actual performing artists, only held 30% each. So Jude, who literally laughed at Henry's share, made himself the sole administrator of multi-currency accounts holding millions of dollars, effectively controlling the lion's share of the profits. And the lingering, toxic fallout of those early decisions, it is still being felt today. Henry himself was actually hospitalized for 2 months last year. He claims Peter and Paul called to check on him, but Jude ignored him completely. Tony, the dancer who practically begged their mother to let Jude manage them, is now reportedly living in isolation in Lagos, completely cut off from the wealth. Lillian, who collected those early gate fees, is entirely excluded from the legacy, and Mary, their youngest sister, is supposedly prevented from receiving any financial assistance from the empire at all. According to Henry, Jude actively manipulated the twins to alienate the rest of the family just to maintain his absolute monopoly. So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Can a family business ever truly survive that toxic clash of fame, insane money, and unwritten contracts? The story of P-Square isn't just about the music. It's a massive cautionary tale about the hidden costs of empire building. It seems their mother's dark premonition actually came true. Sure, the wealth stayed in the family, but the family itself was completely shattered in the process. What happens when that centralized corporate monopoly finally turns on itself and collapses the P-Square brand? Well, we are going to unpack all of that in episode 2 of this explainer series. Until then, ask yourself, who really pays the price for fame?